With the release of both Fallout and The Last of Us, video game fans are finally getting worthy adaptations of the stories and worlds we all know and love. However, despite both being incredible shows, The Last of Us and Fallout show two vastly different ways to translate video games into a television medium. The Last of Us is a highly cinematic, linear game that already borrows a lot of its storytelling conventions from cinema, so this translation is easier than something like Fallout, for example, whose RPG origins allows the TV show to play around within the world of Fallout and tell its own story. We can't say that one show is better than the other because both show different ways to translate. It's like saying one language is better than another language during translation. It doesn't really work. They are both valid translations. Now, spoiler warning ahead, I will be spoiling the TV shows of both The Last of Us and Fallout. As you will see throughout this video, spoiling the story for the TV show of The Last of Us also spoils the story for the game, but spoiling the story for the Fallout TV show does not spoil any of the Fallout games. So if you're currently working your way through any Fallout game having watched the show, I will not be talking about any of those stories. Now, on to our comparison. Part 1. Cinematic storytelling versus customized storytelling. The Last of Us is a highly linear game that follows a cinematic narrative that primarily tells most of its story moments through cutscenes. Now, watching cutscenes is very similar to watching a movie or a TV show. These cutscenes are incredibly heart-wrenching, beautiful performances by all the actors in the game, but translating them to a visual medium is different because it's more replication than it is adaptation. If you watch the scene in The Last of Us TV show where Joel's daughter Sarah is shot down, it's very similar to the way it exists in the original game. The storytelling focused in The Last of Us is highly cinematic by default. And to be honest, it is still one of the best stories in gaming. Following Joel and Ellie's trek through this desolate environment is heartbreaking every single time you play it, so watching that on screen is just as heartbreaking as being in control. When you sit down to play a Naughty Dog game, you understand that you are sitting within somebody else's story. Somebody has written this narrative and you are on a journey to experience it. You are still experiencing it differently than you would watch a movie. Obviously, you're in a controller seat, you're making decisions, but those decisions don't have any long-lasting impacts on the story. There's only one way to play The Last of Us. Fallout, however, is a different experience. Fallout prides itself on its RPG origins. It's based upon bringing your own story to Fallout. The way in which you engage with Fallout's narrative depends on what kind of person you want to be, who you want to talk to, who you want to kill. All of these things change the way each person plays a Fallout game. This customizes Fallout's story to be unique to each individual person who engages with it. There are hundreds of different ways to play any given Fallout game, unlike the single path that The Last of Us takes you on. Now, when adapting these into a television medium, obviously this is a medium that is usually surrounded by linear stories. These are the things that exist in TV. It's only recently on Netflix that we've gotten kind of things that maybe don't exactly follow this linear path, things like Bandersnatch, Kaleidoscope, that can be watched in different ways by different people. However, for the most part, the adaptations of both The Last of Us and Fallout followed this more traditional linear approach. The Last of Us's cinematic narrative followed this translation, creating a TV show that was as linear as the game. The story is very similar, it follows the same beats, there are changes, and I really do love those changes, but for the most part, the story of Joel and Ellie is practically replicated on screen as it is in the game. However, Fallout's linear approach has to somehow take all of these different ways to experience the world of Fallout and streamline them into one cohesive story. And the fact that it was able to translate these kind of RPG stories into its narrative shows an incredible work done by the writers. Experiencing The Last of Us is experiencing Joel and Ellie's cinematic story. Experiencing Fallout is experiencing a customized exploration of the world. So that then brings us to part 2. Character focus versus world building. The Last of Us is an incredibly beautiful character-driven story. What makes The Last of Us game so wonderful is as you play Joel, you start to understand his motivations. You're the one who controls where he moves, who he fights. You develop an immediate connection to this person, unlike in the show, where as you're watching, obviously you like Pedro Pascal. I'm gonna call him Pedro Pascal Joel because that's the TV show Joel. But you like him enough, but you don't have this same connection as being in control because you feel like you are Joel as opposed to the TV show where you feel like you're watching Joel. The character focus of The Last of Us is what makes it such a heart-wrenching story. The ending of The Last of Us has stood the test of time and is still talked about to this day because of the way in which it forces the player to make decisions that they might not want to make. It's a powerful choice to make this kind of storytelling decision in a video game. And on television, it reads the same way. You come to form a bond between Joel and Ellie, and then at the end of the show, you witness Joel make his horrific decision, and you just have to sit back and watch him do it. It's a tragic tale about arrogance and control. Fallout, on the other hand, can be anything from you want to be a boxer who wants to punch people to you want to be a guy who talks his way out of every situation. Fallout is a goofier world to explore. Fallout instead creates a world for you to live in. It's a playground for ideas, for systems for you to engage with on a gameplay level of who to talk to, who to shoot, who to make an enemy from, who to form an alliance with. This is the fun of Fallout. A playground of nuclear wasteland that you get to go and do what you want in. The character focus of Fallout is not as important as the way you build your character. Whereas in The Last of Us, as much as you are Joel, Joel is more you. You are making decisions on behalf of this person. In Fallout, you create that person. That person in the world does not exist until you give them life. So the TV show instead adapts this aspect of Fallout. It doesn't focus on any specific character, but explores a range of different characters. You have Lucy, who is a vault dweller who's come out into this wasteland. You have Maximus and the Brotherhood of Steel and his relationship with them. And you have the Ghoul, who is just the guy who goes around shooting everyone, which everyone plays the Fallout game as that guy at least once. The characters aren't the focus of Fallout, but it's rather how those characters interact with the world. That's what makes the Fallout TV show so much fun to watch, is watching these people play around in the playground. The goofy dialogue that they have, the funny scenes they get into, the action-packed confrontations, these are the things that make Fallout Fallout. The Last of Us TV show does a great job of making sure that people who loved the game will also watch the show, whereas Fallout appeals to fans of the game by showing them a different story in the same context. Which brings us then to part 3, replication versus evocation. The Last of Us TV show is a replication of the game. There are scenes of The Last of Us TV show that exist that are almost exactly the same as they are in the game. And I don't want this to come off as a criticism. The fact that they are so well done in the game doesn't mean that they're suddenly bad by being put on TV. If anything, it's worse that they're in the game because they work much better in a visual medium where you're not in control. These are great cutscenes that work as awesome scenes in a TV show. But the replication of The Last of Us isn't just in its cutscenes. The characters that exist in this show are exactly the same characters that exist in the game. Casting The Last of Us was a very important thing leading up to the show. Everyone was excited to see who will play Joel, who will play Ellie. These are characters that are integral to the story of the game that will exist within the TV show. The correct casting of these characters is what this show hinges upon. If you don't cast these characters correctly, if the direction is off, if it isn't a perfect replication of what the game story is, then the show wouldn't have been as good. Yes, it's not an exact copy of the game. There are changes that The Last of Us made, but for the most part, the core story of The Last of Us is exactly the same. It starts the same way, it ends the same way. Anything in between and the deviations they make are good deviations, but they still get us to the same conclusion. Casting for Fallout was not like this at all. There were no major characters that were revealed in the Fallout TV show that are from the games. There was no major announcement that this actor is playing this famous Fallout character. Instead, what Fallout does is it evokes the feeling of the game. You have people like Walton Goggins, people like Ella Purnell, who are known actors and still add a star power to this show, but don't diverge by saying they're playing a specific type of character. Rather, this person is playing this archetype that exists within the world of Fallout. This allows these actors to then make their own choices. They aren't replicating anything that already exists. A lot of them haven't played the game, but playing the game doesn't make them play characters in the exact same way. The Last of Us has actors in Season 1 who have played the exact same character in the game. The most recent Season 2 casting choice as of the filming of this video was Jeffrey Wright playing the same character he played in the second game. The Last of Us replicates what made the game so good, and it does so successfully. Fallout evokes what made the game so good, and it also does so successfully. Both of these are valid ways to translate these stories, but both do it in different ways. Part of Fallout's evocation is the way in which it references specific elements of Fallout stories, but does so in a new way. There are classic tropes of Fallout games, leaving the vault, the idea of one of your family members being tied up in some conspiracy that you have to go and find. These are things that exist within the Fallout games, but the Fallout show does so in a way that is still different than it exists in the game. But at the end of the day, these are both translations of things that are already popular taken to a new medium. So this probably brings us then into part 4, franchising versus replayability. The Last of Us TV show was attached to HBO. HBO has established itself to making these high-quality, narrative-driven, story-based type of shows, things like Game of Thrones, The Sopranos. The Last of Us fits in this category very well. It's a beautifully written story based around character choices, and most of those character choices aren't ones that a viewer will probably agree with. But if you had never played The Last of Us games, and I'm sure most people hadn't watching the show, and you watched the show and then went back to play the game, your experience won't be vastly different. Playing the game won't give you a completely different story, but you will be able to understand and appreciate the differences that the show made. It works well for the sequel, I guess, for people who maybe watched the first season of the show and goes, oh, I wonder what happens next. Now they can go and play The Last of Us Part 2 or just wait for the second season of the show. There was an uptick in sales after the release of The Last of Us Season 1, but it wasn't major, not as major, for example, as Fallout. After the release of the Fallout TV show, there's some massive sales and playtime of every single Fallout game, even Fallout 76. Nobody plays Fallout 76. The success of franchising Fallout comes from the idea that the show doesn't spoil anything to do with the games. It instead gives an idea, a vibe, an evocation of what makes the games so great. If you enjoyed the Fallout TV show, then there are plenty of games that will give you the same feel that you haven't experienced before. You will have nothing spoiled for you. You might know what the Brotherhood of Steel are, or what a vault is, and what some of the creatures that appear in the show are, but most of the things you experience in these games will be new. The franchise potential of Fallout succeeded in the way that every video game adaptation wants to, by drawing more people towards the games that the show is based on. It's harder to do that for a show like The Last of Us because once you've either watched the show or play the game, you know the main story. Experiencing that for the first time won't come again, but you could play a Fallout game so many times. There is so much replayability in each of those games. Sure, the show, a linear medium, doesn't work that way. Once you watch the show once, you're not going to have the same surprises, but if you enjoyed the world of Fallout, you can see those surprises in every single Fallout game. The translations of both The Last of Us and Fallout are incredible TV shows. Despite their differences, both do an incredible job of exploring the worlds and stories and characters of each of these games and broadening their appeal to a wider audience. If anyone who had never played The Last of Us or Fallout before was encouraged to play them because of these shows, then that's great. Most of these games are wonderful things to experience. But even if your knowledge or experience is only with these TV shows, you're still going to get an incredible story. Thank you for watching. If you've seen The Last of Us and Fallout, let me know which one you like more. Not which one is better, but which one you have a personal connection to. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.